Penumbra Black Plague is the sequel to Penumbra Overture and follows Phillip as he uncovers the mysteries of the Archaic secret underground facility in Greenland. Atmosphere. The facility has a sterile, clinical feel to it, despite all the corpses and abandonment. The music that plays gives it a haunting feel, like a morgue. There's a sense of unease with explosive traps set up all over the place, and a lot of rooms seem like they've been ransacked. There's lots of moody lighting, and using the glow stick gives off an eerie green light. The game has the same hands-on interaction that was used in Overture, and as usual, it really puts you in the environment, with you being able to use the mouse to drag and pull open drawers and throw items, which is your only means of defense, since unlike Overture, your weapons have been taken away at the start of the game, and you're left defenseless. The dream sequence is visually nightmarish, but radiates spirituality that I don't find threatening. But it introduces Clarence, a voice in your head caused by the infection of the Turngate Collective. He has a silly accent and chimes in at random times to comment on things, and nothing breaks the immersion more than hearing him talk about how many movies you've ever seen.
If we must continue to share this brain space, I think I should have a name. Strange. So rare an opportunity to select one's own nomenclature, and yet I find myself at a loss. Any ideas, monkey? So much storage in this mind of yours. Did you realize you got an entire section in here devoted to film titles? 3,103 and a half films you've seen? You only got the first half of It's a Wonderful Life in here. Huh, how does it end? Now I'll never know. You know, Clarence, that's not a bad handle. I am something of a guardian angel.
In the same vein, Amabel Swanson also seems happy for what's going on every time we talk to her. It really fights against the oppressive, lonely feel of the game when the two voices you hear the most are cracking jokes and laughing. The atmosphere is immersive and can be creepy. There are moments of despair, isolation and loneliness, but I found myself dragged out of it time and time again by Clarence and Amabel. That's no Harry Masons. Scares. There's a few brief and well-handled jump scares, such as things banging on doors when you get close to them, but most of the scares come from the infected, the black-eyed enemies that roam specific areas and chase after you on sight. Whilst they're repulsive and initially frightening, you can stun them by throwing things at them. They struggle to follow you after you've turned a few corners, and it takes a few hits for them to kill you. But they still move pretty quickly, and getting pinned by them or the occasion when you're trapped in a room with one can prove fatal if you don't think quickly. Dealing with them and having to open doors with the early version of the mouse controls can also be a point of fear, with things not working perfectly and leaving you frantically trying to activate something or use an item whilst being chased. It's about as scary as the game gets. Besides the infected, there's a few scripted events like the earthworm boss fight with it emerging from the walls, and with a giant hole in the floor in the middle of the room, it's extremely stressful to try and dodge its attacks without falling to your death. And then finally there's the kennels with the unseen enemy that kills you instantly. This was a little frustrating, but it can be incredibly frightening as you try to outrun them. The game isn't that long and balances the scares and puzzles quite well, but the infected as enemies can be lacking a bit sometimes. That's one Harry Mason. Sound design. The game's soundtrack is very synthetic, with a lot of electronic drones and unnerving jitters. There's a ton of creepy, eerie tones that swell and fade, as well as haunting yet mysterious synthy chimes. Some things sound almost like rattling put into music, and during the chase sequences there's a choir of ghostly wails that swoop down like a curtain of oppression. Thundering electronic drums and eerie reverbed cries fill the moments of your panicked getaway. The soundtrack is really great and would later build the foundation for the same deeply creepy soundtrack that made up Soma. The sound effects are all carried over from Penumbra Overture, and the addition of computers has led to more electronic sounds. I can clearly remember the chime played by the computer when I'm not even playing the game. As per usual, the sound space and item noises as they're thrown is pretty good, but sometimes the reverb is a bit unrealistic. The voices of the infected aren't that creepy, but the roars and gurgles are kind of repulsive sounding. The voice acting is technically good, but all the voice acted characters are a bit silly, Clarence being the worst offender with a New York accent that can, at points, ruin the immersion completely. Whilst he's undoubtedly funny, the nature of his identity crisis is a bit harder to take seriously when he's also cracking jokes. Amabel seems far too happy to be the lone survivor in an isolated base under Greenland, where all her colleagues were murdered, and Richard Emesis just has some really odd lines. There's directional audio like usual, and it does a great job of helping you figure out where enemies are. The soundtrack is pretty great, and the sound effects are really good. Whilst the voice acting is technically good, I really don't know what they were going for here with the character tones. That's 2 Harry Masons. Gore. There's several nasty dead bodies, with 1 or 2 of them having decayed and some unpleasant moments of drawing blood from a corpse with a needle. The infected themselves have strange growths and seem emaciated, which is also unpleasant to behold. There's not a great deal of gore, but what is here suffices. That's 3 Harry Masons.
Without this knowledge, without this foundation, you could not have the will to do what I must now ask of you. I followed my father to the Greenland wastes to uncover his secrets. You had to know how far I was willing to go. I found a disused mining shaft and took shelter from the storm. You had to know how desperate I was. I was plagued by doubts, fears, and mysteries, and aided by a madman, Red. You had to know how lonely I was. I incinerated my best friend. Red told me he wanted to die. You had to know how guilty I felt. I ventured boldly onwards, and was struck down by my own heroics. You had to know how stupid I was. All of these things, so human, so perfect, and yet still I failed to do what I must now ask of you.
Story. Continuing on from where the story left off in Overture, Phillip, who arrived in Greenland and took shelter in a mineshaft, gets knocked unconscious and wakes up in an underground research facility run by the mysterious Archaic caste that his father was a part of. After some exploring, he realises he's infected and so manifests the voice in his head as Clarence, who's a form of antagonist of the game. Clarence spends a lot of the game antagonising and encouraging Phillip to kill himself, but also ponders about his own individuality as a stray from the Turngate Collective, the otherworldly race discovered by the Archaic at their tomb in Greenland.
I'm not you. I'm part of something larger. We are nothing. We are a mistake. I need to rejoin them. Release me. Let me out. This is not right. I should be with them. I am them. There should be no I.
There's a lot of interesting characters, and while some are a bit eccentric, like Dr. Richard Emesis, whose infection causes him to remember things with perfect clarity, and Amabel Swanson, the lone survivor, there's a dark, serious tone to the diary entries and computer logs that recall the events of the archaeological expedition that led to the discovery of the tomb. Some of them are a bit stuffy and boring, but there are some fascinating and mysterious ones too. It's a rollercoaster ride of things going wrong, from Philip's infection to Amabel's promise of hope, and then the plot twist death that takes place near the end that sees you killing Amabel before you can meet her, before communing with the ethereal Turngate Collective, making the final score 4 out of 5 Harry Masons. Penumbra Black Plague was the beginning of an era, with the formula being refined and reused in games to come. And while so many things in this game are stellar, and as characters Clarence and Amabel are both likeable or dislikable, the choice of voice actors and their tone of reading lines is just too jarring. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I nearly ended up inside an earthworm, I did not scream like a banshee or run away from the computer. I advise you don't either. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. You can always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.